Dr. Jazz.
I did the talk with Andrew D'Angelo.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Fantastic.
and with Jim. And I was like,
Jim. All right.
I was like, man, we have to talk.
You got to get your Seattle triptych finished, right?
Exactly.
You know,
like check. Cuong is the next one. So like.
Right. He's actually, he lives in Seattle now.
Seattle, yeah. And it's, you, especially you and Jim. I mean, I have you on so many records, and it's. I talked with him, and it's. What you guys did, I told Jim, like, Alice No Axis, for me, that's one of my favorite bands. Like, really.
Oh, great! Yeah.
I listened to this one for such a long time, so, and I'll dig into some of that, but
wherever you want to go, man. Like,
I mean, I want to start with Intact, like.
Okay.
Like the last trio with Chris Tordini and Dave King.
Yeah.
I have Platinum on tap, and then I listen to Respect for Your Toughness, and it's just. I love it because, it's what you mentioned, like this Led Zeppelin meets Chris Speed, Bach, something, ethno, jazz, whatever. I mean, it's your music. Like, when you write music, I mean, I've been following you since Yeah, No, which is like, I guess, a long time ago. So,
yeah.
And, but I wanted to ask you, like, how did this trio come together? I mean, it's one of the rare occasions you don't play with Jim, actually, kind of.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jim and I, we were joined at the hip for a while, in the 90s for sure. And, obviously he probably mentioned this. I've known him since we were in high school, Andrew as well. I feel very lucky and fortunate to have made connections early on with colleagues that I still am close with today. And we sort of worked in tandem through a lot of projects. We had, of course, Human Feel with Andrew, and that's sort of like, the genesis for me of like learning about music and having a band and working with people and writing music and sort of formulating like an identity and to try to come up with something new. And so, going from there, like sort of each sort of endeavor, like I kind of, got into, like, Jim was down as well, whether it was Pechora, getting into a lot of Eastern music, or my group, which was sort of trying to find some common ground between rock, electronic, and new music and Balkan music. And then like his group, I mean, each project just sort of made sense to sort of stick together.
Definitely, yeah.
And then so much sort of improv music that we made, like with Skuli as well, who I consider, part of my inner circle as well. And so I feel very fortunate. And I just called him an hour ago or so with Marnie. So we keep in touch, and we try to keep, connected, as well as doing, the other things that we, want to do. And it's not, we don't need each other in that sense.
It's like, not an exclusive thing,
But it's nice to like be able to like, have those relationships with people that you've known forever, where there's no sort of bullshit. I mean, it's just like, we're just like old men hanging out, like, well, especially with we have another band called Endangered Blood with Oscar and
I love that, man. That's
and
killing.
Trevor, and we're just like old grumpy dudes, just like giving each other shit, So it's like, I totally, I'm very grateful to have, relationships like that, because as we know, with music and arts, people are creative and temperamental, and, some relationships, don't, end, cycles or whatever. And it's just nice to be able to stay close with people. And so that being said, you asked about the trio. The trio was really, I'd known Dave for some point, and I'd been working with him with he has called the Trucking Band, which is a quintet,
I love that.
Of his homies from Minneapolis. And but anyway, I'd known Dave for a while. He's what a force, what a creative force of nature, and like one of the, like, smartest and just like such a great musician.
Yeah.
And I just had the idea to sort of, it makes it sound like I'm being some sort of musicologist or retro nostalgic musician, but I just wanted a band that I could really sort of zone in on, maybe sort of a style of the tenor trio. I mean, whatever, however, I'm dancing around, I'm dancing around, but it's like, I wanted to play jazz in a tenor trio with guys who would like really commit to playing swing and playing form and sort of old school, but you know, also bring something new and
modern.
And those guys, they really helped me get through it. They allow me to sort of play like an old man, but like they make it really good. So that's kind of the thought behind that. And then of course, you know, you have these sort of, you put up these like sort of parameters, and then it ends up being what it's going to be anyway, which is kind of my weird take on jazz and improvised music, but maybe just more in a, you know, context of the tenor trio tradition, meaning like Sonny Rollins, Joe Henderson, and, you know, name your favorite tenor player. They've all, I mean, it's sort of a standard to play trio. And I've really, it was sort of time for me. Like I love jazz so much, and I've spent my whole life like loving it, working on it, playing it. My sort of recorded output had been more sort of focused on original compositions, and maybe not necessarily swing or jazz, exclusively jazz, you know, influence. But this kind of, I don't know. I think.
Oh, it's beautiful, man. It's like, you know, it's. I love what you did. It's such a strong trio, and also the compositions are amazing. You know.
Oh, cool.
Really.
Yeah, I'm just. It's like, I mean, at this point, I don't know. I just, even like doing standards, I just like, okay, well, I guess I have something to say over this standard, you know, at this point. So like, why not do it? And it's fun to do. And I think it's good music. And I sort of wanted to just like be able to sort of focus on a way of making music that wasn't based on like, you know, like shredding, you know, just like to play songs and to like make music that feels good. I don't know. But I mean, we always want our music to do that, but it's like I was sort of intent on keeping it about that. And
it's funny that you mentioned, because with you, I always get the idea you do that.
Well, I mean, see, that's the thing, is like all these projects is all kind of, maybe like 100 years from now, if any of this still exists, like it's probably all going to sound the same, our output, you know, like whether it's, for me, like whether it's Balkan influenced or classical music or it's probably all going to just sound the same. Like, well, that's that guy.
But it's who you are. Yeah. But it's like, you know, if you listen to, I don't know, Eric Dolphy, you know, he plays like, I don't know, it's 4 bars and you're like, okay, that's Eric Dolphy. You know,
In fact, I just heard 4 bars of Eric Dolphy. There's floating around like a live gig from Sweden, I think, Coltrane with Dolphy, and they play Blue Train.
Really?
Like, what? It sounds so good. Yeah, I'll send it to you. Like, it's just,
oh man,
it's like Train playing Blue Train with Elvin and, you know, Jimmy and
Dolphy
and McCoy and Dolphy, and it's so good. It's that's the thing of like doing these projects. Like I have a band with Tim Byrne and Dave King as well, and Reed Anderson, doing like Ornette's music and Julius Hempfield's music. And it's like, well, we're not going to do it better than those guys, but it's still fun to like play the music and kind of put it in but it's just that funny thing of like, we work so hard on certain things, like making good music in this context. And like, then you listen to, you know, our heroes do it, and it's like, oh, well, there you go. That's how it should sound. Yeah.
You still listen to Coltrane, and it's amazing. You know, like, I don't know, Village Vanguard, 61. This is like 60 years old, and it sounds as modern, as fresh as, you know.
It only gets better.
Yeah.
You know,
I find that so amazing. But then on the other hand, you listen to some, not naming stuff, but like, you know, something from the 80s and it sounds so outdated, or, you know, some 90s stuff, and it's like, I'll skip that, you know.
I know what you're saying. I think a lot of that has to do with production, obviously, what's popular at the time. Like you can sort of identify pop music immediately by the synth sound or the drum gating or whatever. But a lot of a lot of that music I've sort of, yeah, it feels dated, but a lot of that music still deserves our attention. Like,
Yeah, sure.
you know, like even if it's somebody, I mean, just to name names, like my own experience with that is somebody like Alan Halsworth or David Sanborn. Like, you know, maybe on this, when you first hear the music, it's like, oh, that's fusion, and you put it in that box because of that production or lack of production. But then when you actually like listen to what they're doing, it's like, it's still killing and still.
Halsworth, it's like,
I mean,
beyond anywhere. I mean,
beyond, and so
many players like that. Yeah.
And even going backwards, like I think a lot of why it's harder for, well, especially younger musicians to like dig into like vintage early stuff is just because of this recording quality. You know, you want to listen to Louis Armstrong, and then but the quality is sometimes preventative, especially if you're a younger musician and you always, you know, you want the newest, latest thing. But I really sort of try to be patient when I'm listening to music. If something's taking me out, and just sort of like sit with it to try to get, because then you hear like Louis Armstrong play and you're just like, oh my God, it's
it's true.
That's it. Done.
Yeah, it's true. Yep. You mentioned like if I just go back to the trio, you know, you mentioned, I don't know, Joe Henderson, of course, and Sonny Rollins, and the trios that are amazing. How is it for you to play like in a trio, in a sense of being liberated or not, or harmonically, you know, you don't have an instrument, you don't have Hilmar or whoever, or
right. You're just talking specifically about playing in a non-chordal
setting. In this format, like without a, I know you did it with Berne or many other bands, but you know, it's funny, I've sort of come, I think initially, like I just felt comfortable maybe in a chordless situation, just for one, loving Ornette's music so much, and two, maybe like not having the right pianist that felt fun to play in that context with. And maybe also just maybe when I was younger, just I felt maybe there's a sort of a intimidation or a fear factor of like playing with a pianist, and I don't know, it just maybe not feeling like I had the ability to really navigate like a dense harmonic thing, whether it's intonation or sometimes chordal instruments can sort of steer you in directions, you know, and maybe I just didn't have the abilities to sort of navigate that in a way where I still felt like I could make music in a flowing kind of way. But I think, I'm sort of pseudo, you know, analyzing my younger self. I think at this point, like, it just happens to be the context. And like, I love playing with pianists and guitarists, or it's not like a conscious decision of like, I don't want chords. And in fact, sometimes I wish like there was another element to sort of like add that other sort of layer of texture to give the listener something more to go with. And in this band with the trio, we're playing sort of more harmonic and form oriented things. There's a few sort of freer contexts, you know, like that we'll get into, but like, it's mostly like I'm trying to sort of stay in a harmonic, you know, form, but not really like my, you know, my let's just say I've most of my output has been without chords, you know, like there's something about a couple horns and bass and drums that are just like, you know, that's like feels very comfortable to me. And so, but you know, who knows, maybe I should drop in a pianist for the next record. I don't know, you know, we'll see. But it sounds great. It's not, you know, for me, I love it. The less is more for me because it's so spacious, you know.
There's a lot of space.
I don't know. I love that.
It's like, and then what do you do with all that space? Then it becomes like, you know, well, it's always about a taste thing, but like, you know,
sure.
How do we deal with that space and still make it interesting, you know, just sort of, I'm learning the older I get, it's going to be okay. We can let the space just sort of exist and not have to fill it up with something all the time. And but that's a lifelong lesson for sure.
I love, you know, the use of space of this trio, because like, I wanted to ask you one thing. You know, I listened to the record a lot, and I mean,
Thank you.
And it's beautiful, the tunes. I mean, I want to ask you about the compositions a little, but first of all, I know you've done so much odd meters with, like, Pachora and human feel as well, but let's say Pachora with kind of, 1 2 3 1 2 1 2, all the Balkan stuff.
Yeah.
But Taborn to run on this one, it's like 11, and it's not like this Balkan style
Right.
of 11. And at first, I wanted to ask you, how do you make yourself comfortable? Also with Dejan, when I saw you playing over complex forms, which are not talking, let's say, about Balkan style now,
right.
but like over this, whatever, 13, 17. How do you feel comfortable playing over this?
Well, that's a
tough question.
Pretty, yeah, no, it is. I could speak about my experience with Dejan.
Yeah.
But I think I should let me just sort of kind of go through my sort of personal evolution through all that. Like, so many years ago, through an old friend of mine named Matt Dario, who's fantastic instrumentalist, and he's great. And so I was in a band with him back when we lived in Boston called Orange and Blue, and he basically, via his record collection and the Bulgarian Women's Choir, I just really fell in love with a lot of this music from Greece and Bulgaria, and I just kind of dove head in like I did with jazz, and just kind of approached it like this new beautiful thing that I got to discover and learn from, and it inspired me to play the clarinet again. And it just kind of opened up a whole rhythmic world for me, and harmonic world. And so I spent a lot of time like transcribing, all these songs in these different rhythms, 5/8, 7/8, 11/8, 13/8, 15/8, sometimes 18/8, but mostly 15 was about as high as it got for me as far as these dance rhythms. And just like it really just made me like a better musician, more, maybe even sort of gave me more sort of, I think I became aware of sort of the role music has just with culture in general, just by exploring another world music and seeing the connection with dance and obviously jazz is, has all that as well, but it's nice to sort of check out some other sort of aspect of art and music. And anyway, so I really I just started learning all these melodies, and then formed a band and Pachora, and we just basically started as a repertoire band, like trying to like learn these songs, and then how to, okay, now what? How do you improvise? Oh, okay.
Man, I wore this one out, man.
Wow. Then like learning how to improvise, because we're jazz musicians, how to sort of then navigate some sort of improvisational aspects with this music. And so like learning how to improvise in 5 and 7 and 9 was just, I approached it sort of via folk music. I know a lot of people are sort of inspired by like Steve Coleman's approach to odd time. I just came at it from a more sort of, from folk music, more so than like from like, he's like a rhythmic scientist.
Mathematically, really,
super heavy and like,
amazing.
But I just came at it from more sort of this world music approach. And then, well, obviously I'm not, a Rom Gypsy musician, and I'm not a musicologist. And so I just, I just have taken as much, of the knowledge as I can, and then just try to apply it to like the music that I feels like home to me in the music that I make. So, and that just takes years of like working on stuff where that's when you ruminate on something, and then hopefully when it does sort of, come out as some other sort of being, some other song or some other thing, at least hopefully it'll have some personal connection. And so a lot of the music that I wrote maybe has some sort of rhythmic, twists and turns, but it's, it's still me. But I've spent a lot of time sort of like, trying to feel as comfortable playing in 11 as I do in 4 or 7 or 5. And so how do you do that? You just write songs and play with your friends, and try to get those you know, those rhythms down, and then, you know, the whole idea of exploring all the aspects of it, you know, like, and taking 11/8, making it 11/4, putting the sort of the crooked parts and different parts of the measure, different subdivisions, and then like, I mean, it's endless, you know, when you get into that sort of way of like, and same thing with harmony, of just like, you know, sort of finding all these different possibilities and then sort of zoning in on what makes sense to you, and how best to sort of make good music with these extra tools, you know, at your disposal. And so I think like, especially like a meter like 11, I love it. I still like, I'm finding ways to subdivide it, whether it's like bringing in some triplet elements, or like triplets over the twos, or quadruples over the threes, or, you know, quintuplets over the fours, you know, whatever it is, like, you know, there's always some expand. It's like the universe. It's like, it's
amazing.
The more you know, the more you know, you don't know. And it's like, it's very, it's just, it's always continually, you know, expansive, you know, the possibilities. So, so that's, I mean, just kind of writing music and then like trying to like make it work in any sort of context. So like the trio, like I have a few things in 11, some are like, you know, pretty direct sort of folk based, and some I've tried to stretch it out. And like a song like Taborn to Run, I'm trying, I think the melodies has this idea of like threes over twos. And then it's funny because the way the melody is written, you know, the odd time is maybe in the center of the measure, where Dave kind of puts the odd time at the end. So you get this nice rub, and it's like, and they've not begrudgingly, but I think now they love playing in 11 because we've done it so much. So like, it's and again, like it's not like I'm trying to be clever. It's just like, it's just part of me now, and a lot of stuff.
What you do also,
and also it's like this idea of like, well, trying to come up with, you know, something new, some new ways of looking at things, and you know, of course it'd be fun just to play blues and 4/4, but you know, like I just it's a way for me to sort of put to write new music.
I know what you mean. I mean, when you write music, let's say for the trio, I mean, if I dig into your composer's brain or process, like, let's say writing music for the trio, do you know that you're going to write for Dave and Chris, or did you just write music like, okay, I'm going to write a tune in 11? Or
it really depends. I'm sure we're all the same in this way. Like, okay, you got to come up with some tunes. Like, you just make the tunes, and like sometimes like I have them in mind, sometimes I don't. You know, at this very moment, I've been trying to write music for Pechora.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
And like, I'm really, that's sort of my next, I don't know if it's going to be the next thing, because I don't know when we're going to be able to get together, and we're debating how to do it. You know, do we make tracks, do it remotely? I don't know. I would just want us to get in a room together. But I have like 10 new songs, and I've just been like in this zone of like, this is definitely a Pechora song. And I just committed to like getting it done. It's been almost 20 years since we've recorded. And I was very inspired, and I think sort of relearning the clarinet the last summer kind of got me back in that mode as well. It's like, oh, that's a Pechora-ish thing, you know, and just like, so a lot of the music that I've been working on just kind of ends up being something. And on the same token, same thing with the trio. Like, I have probably 6 new songs for the trio, just because, well, this is clearly for that. And it's not like I'm sitting down like with pen and paper and like, it's more like the result of like noodling around or practicing or like, you know, just playing along with records or whatever it is. And then a certain idea will come out, and then I flesh it out however I can, whether it's like recording myself improvising and then listening back, or if it's just like, just practicing, like the ideas sort of like can be fleshed out. And then, and in that way, then it sort of becomes obvious to me what it needs to be. And lots of ideas sort of just stay in limbo because I don't, where do they go? And and it was funny because I had a couple solo pieces that became compositions just from practicing. So, well, this is clearly complete. Okay, done there. So it doesn't need a bass line. I don't need to think of what the drummer should do, you know?
That's good.
But yeah, with the trio, it's funny because I try to keep it like, certain parameters that I kind of try to box myself in just to give me something to work against.
Yeah.
And maybe some of the songs, like maybe it should be in another context, but I like trying to sort of make it work with the musicians that I'm working with.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
I don't have the ability to call up an orchestra to come in and read through or a string quartet to read through my new piece. You know, it's sort of like I just kind of am dealing with what I can, you know,
Yeah.
with who I have around. And
do you change tunes also?
I don't know what I was saying. What's that?
Do you also change compositions then, you know, once you try them with a band, or you kind of leave them? Or
I can't. I'm sort of notorious. I think Jim could attest to that. Like I'll bring something in and we'll read it, and then the next time I'll change it and bring.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of that. At this point, I'm trying to do less of that. Like just sort of commit to the ideas and just let them. You know, obviously, when you bring something to a band, you're giving it up anyway. Because the reason why we're playing with the musicians we play with is so that they'll put their stamp on, or you know, trust them to make. Yeah. I mean, believe me, like I'm pretty aware that Skuli or Tordini or Reed Anderson are going to come up with a better bass line than anything I can write. But it's like I can bring in a sketch, you know, and okay, here's, you know, some ideas for the, you know what I'm saying. So a lot of the music I write is dependent on the people I'm playing with, for sure. I'm trying to be a little more, well, especially, I mean, it's funny because having these conversations like this, you know, with you now and the previous ones, like, you know, things have, the last year, we sort of need to like, you know, keep in context because, you know, it's really sort of, you know, changed, you know, the way I've thought about some things. And so like, maybe at the moment I'm being a little more thorough with the compositions because I can, because I can't get them played anyway. So I'm just trying to be a little more, but yeah, you know, I'm really dependent on like, for you know, the musicians that I work with to sort of make it sound.
Sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned playing with people, right? And we mentioned Jim before. I mean, I have to ask you that, like, so you both guys are from Seattle, right?
Yep.
And you know, so for me, I'm a little bit younger than you, but like for me, one of the best albums still which I put on is Dirt by Alice in Chains. That's, I think, one of my overall favorite 10 records, and the Seattle scene and all that, you know, the grunge, which came, I guess, later when you already almost moved to New York, I think. But how was the scene in the 80s, if you can just describe it, like in Seattle? Also, you guys discovering jazz. I mean, like, I know Andrew and Jim told me a little bit about it, but like, if you can sum it up, like you discovering guys jazz together, or.
Yeah, I can. I mean, I'm a jazz musician. I wasn't a, you know, a rock musician. So the whole, you know, grunge world, like I was aware of it, but I was aware of like maybe when I was in junior high school, there was guys in high school that had garage bands that was like stoner rock, you know, like influenced by Zeppelin and whatever, you know, like Black Sabbath. And so that was pretty common, but I was a jazz dork. I mean, I was like I was playing in the Seattle Youth Symphony and playing like classical piano. And so, and then when I got into jazz, like, I mean, so clearly I was not hip to, you know, the workings of that world. I was like, when can I get out of Seattle? You know, I moved to Boston to go to school and moved to New York. It was all like, you know, getting out of Seattle, and sort of, there was some musicians in Seattle, but nothing for me to like want to stick around for, you know, like, I think for musicians, it's important to find community, and obviously these days we can find it, you know, anywhere. But for me at that time in the 80s, like I kind of realized I needed to go somewhere where there was more people who wanted to do what I wanted to do, which was play jazz music. And it sounds like I'm sort of dissing the Seattle scene. I mean, maybe I am. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why we left, you know, like, and when I would go home to visit, so I left Seattle like in 87.
Already? Oh, wow. I thought it was later.
So when I would go visit my friends, we'd go down to Pioneer Square and hear bands, and, you know, and then like, oh, Pavement's playing, you know, like whatever, like that was later, like later 90s. But I sort of, you know, caught that whole world probably right before like Kurt Cobain died, you know, like that's probably when I really got into Nirvana. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing music. And this guy's a force, you know, but, like Alice in Chains, like, I don't really know, you know, that music so well.
Cool.
I don't know that band at all, actually. I know Nirvana, I know some Soundgarden, you know, but my whole rock kind of, you know, knowledge is like Zeppelin, Aerosmith, you know, like, you know, like
the 70s,
you know, 60s, 70s music that was popular in the 70s. And that's what I sort of grew up with. And then I just got into jazz and so that's, it's funny that we're all from Seattle, and people always mention, well, especially in the 90s, you know, the grunge scene. I was like, yeah, it's cool, but
I know it's cool. Yeah, funny.
But I know nothing about it. But but clearly, I mean, especially the Nirvana was like, I mean, that's pretty heavy music.
Yeah,
and I think it holds up too. Yeah,
definitely. But you mentioned then Boston, and you guys went together, right, with Jim and Andrew? Actually, no, you and Jim went. Or...
Well, here's, I mean, this is maybe TMI. Yeah, so you know, why not? We're just missing having a beer right now.
Yeah,
so
man, I would love that shit.
Bar talk. So Jim and Andrew and I met in a kid big band called H.P. Radke and Friends, and it was run by H.P. Radke, who was the son of Fred Radke, who played trumpet with the Harry James Orchestra big band. So like coming out of that tradition of big band dance, big band music. And so when we were in high school, maybe even pre-high school, anyway, 15, 16, 17, there was, you know, a cadre of kids who were interested in jazz, who sort of, you know, we kind of met through this big band playing, you know, weekends dance, you know, like Glenn Miller hits and like, I wish it was more Count Basie, but I think it was more sort of the white, you know, commercial, big bands. More commercial, like Hit Parade, like wartime hits, you know, like Glenn Miller and he's the trombone player, Benny Goodman. Artie Shaw, maybe some more of that. And then some Ellington, probably a little Basie, but probably not as much, unfortunately. So that's where I met Jim, and that's where I met Andrew. And
amazing.
I connected with both of them. I mean, they've been my closest friends since. And Jim moved to Boston right out of high school. So he moved to Boston right out of high school. I went to a state school. Sort of the idea was like I would build up some credits, save money, and then move to Boston in 2 years. That was sort of the work that my parents helped me with. And Jim went right out of high school, and Andrew, he's a year older. He went to the school called Central, where I went the next year, and then he moved to New York. So Jim came back from Boston. I know this is like skip to the end, please. So Jim.
No, come on, man. That's why I do this. I'm like a kid, you know, listening. I love this stuff.
Okay, cool. So Jim moved back from Boston, and he lived in at my house while he went to the Seattle school called the University of Washington. And then I had left that other school, and I was just living at home, like working in a restaurant and going to community college. I don't know what I was just sort of biding time before I moved east. And then Andrew was living in New York. And so then the following year, so this is 2 years after high school, then Jim and I both moved to Boston at the same time. Jim went to Berkeley, and I went to New England Conservatory. And then Andrew moved up from New York to live with us in a freaking studio apartment in Boston. That's why we're all a little bent. Like something's not quite right.
I think Andrew told me some stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. Like, and basically we lived in a studio apartment for a year together. We all worked at Tower Records together, because Andrew was the boss of the jazz department at Tower Records in Boston. And then we formed a band. I mean, it was like, talk about, you know, insanity. And then we formed Human Feel. And that's, it was very intense. I think we were intense, you know, together, just like little kids, you know, like whatever, you know. But so that's, you know, that's our story in Boston. And so when I was in Boston, I was at New England Conservatory, and and playing with Human Feel, working at Tower Records, and playing with bands like Orange and Blue, where I met Matt Dario, and I was doing like all kinds of like wedding gigs and like they called them functions. In the West Coast, you call them casuals. On the East Coast, I think you call them functions. It's like, like wedding music. And right, everybody knows what I'm talking about. And then I was doing like Haitian music, salsa music.
Really? Oh, wow.
And I like telling students, like, it's good to try everything once. It's good to experience something to know whether you want to do it or not do it, and it's good to know it from experience rather than just some idea of like, anyway, that's my thing. But like, I did all kinds of stuff like that. And then, like I mentioned, like Human Feel sort of being a very, very influential part of my life, early 20s and forming a band. And I learned everything about music making kind of with that band, of like writing our own music, coming up with kind of a distinctive, unique sound, and trying to get along with the band, book gigs. So like I owe a lot of my development to those years.
Since you mentioned Human Feel, like how was it like for you guys when you did what was Gold 219, right? Like
our last recording,
or Party Favor, then it was Gold, right?
What was it mean? What was it like getting together?
I mean, how was it like for you guys? You had like your own things going on, each of you, and then coming together back as a band. Like, how did it feel?
I have some thoughts on that, but I have to go back before we actually made that recording to our first sort of reunion, which would have been in the early 2000s.
Galore, right?
Well, before Galore,
when we first,
because we stopped, I guess, in the late 90s, like people just get busy and start doing other things. And we stopped kind of focusing on Human Feel. And it was a few years, I think about 2003, we finally got together just for a gig and we rehearsed, and it was like, it was pretty cool because we're like actually playing songs that we hadn't played in maybe 10 years. And just like, it was like yesterday, it's just the muscle memory of playing the music. It was sort of my first reunion experience, and we weren't really that old yet, but it was still kind of felt like that. And now we've sort of had a few reunions since, where time goes by and then we get together again. But like the first time we did it was very intense because it was the first time having a reunion, but like just doing the older music and just having that feeling of like, oh my God, this is part of me. Like I wrote this when I was like 19 or 20 years old, and here it is. Funny. And I was actually, this is kind of nerdy, but because I used to play a Selmer saxophone, and at this point I was playing a Con, and I even noticed how different it felt playing songs of mine on this horn. It's kind of a funny, tactile, observance. And so we did a concert at Tonic, and we did a lot of our old music, and I don't think we did anything new, but it was super fun. It's like, oh my gosh, this band is fun. And we realized that there was people that liked, like there was a little, I mean, it's, we're talking jazz numbers, but it was like, we have a little cult following of our own. And then, but just, the process is kind of hard to like, maintain, it's all about like, continuity with the band. You want to keep, and none of us sort of took it on to sort of keep it going. So all of our getting togethers are like, sort of just like, fly by night in a way, like, let's do it. Okay, let's do it. I miss you guys. Let's do something. So like, I think, like Party Favor, which sort of preceded, Gold. That was sort of like us, like, come on, let's just like commit. Let's like make some tracks. And we did a few tours, and we did a couple festivals, and it was so much fun. And we just kind of wanted to document that. And I'm what can I say? Like I would wish that
I would like ask you just musically, like musically, like how you guys, like, let's say from your experience, right? we're talking, I don't know, Scatter is what, 1991 or 92 or even early? No,
90, I think.
90, wow. And, you know, Gold is 2019. So we're talking about 30 years of experience.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to touch some of that, but in between, but like for you personally, you've grown probably as a person and as a player. And how did it feel for you, or does it feel like to play with the same people?
I have to say, I was about to kind of mention that, like, I don't want to sound like ungrateful for the opportunity to play with that situation. And I love those guys dearly as my brothers, you know, Kurt, Andrew, and Jim equally. Sometimes things work and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, sure.
And I would think that we would be able to sort of ride that momentum but like, I don't know. I'm feeling a little conflicted because I just want to be super positive about everything. But like our last sort of meetings were maybe not kind of the way I would want them to go. And I'm like, well, we all can, like, you know, we all have other stuff we can do that might even be more fun than this. So like, let's do this again when it feels
cools down,
like we want to do it, you know, and like, and as powerful as our band was, you know, maybe that was it, you know.
You grow or you go somewhere else.
Yeah, we go somewhere else, or maybe like that sort of combination. Maybe, you know, there's limits to where they can go.
Lead them.
And I want to have. I only have, like, you know, good feelings about the music we make and the hangs, you know, like it's sort of like any sort of conflict is always water under the bridge, you know, a week later. But it's sometimes, you know, with any band, it takes some sort of action to sort of keep it moving. And if nobody else is going to sort of make those actions, it's, you know, it's not going to go anywhere, you know.
Sure.
That's the sort of issue with, you know, collective bands in general. Like always somebody is like booking the gigs or sort of trying to get everybody motivated. And I'm not saying who that person is in this situation, but
I know what you mean.
You could probably understand.
I know what you mean. Yeah. You mentioned, I will not dig in there anymore, but you mentioned bands and collectives, right? Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about Tim Berne. You know, he's, you know, one of my favorite bands ever is Blood Count. Seriously, that's
great.
You know, and I've talked to Tim also, and I've played with Tim, and you know, I did kind of like this talk with Tim as well, and he's one of my heroes. You know, like as a true revolutionary in terms of thinking musically, and also as a band leader, actually. And I wanted to ask you, like, you coming to New York, I think it was one of your first kind of like this huge experiences with Tim.
Indeed.
How did you get involved into that band, first of all, and how was it like for you to play in that one? And big questions, what did you learn, like, from Tim as a band leader and as a, you know, promoter of his music in his own way? And
so just a quick anecdote, even before I met Tim, like, so when Jim was living at my house and outside, so I grew up in Issaquah, which is outside of Seattle. So when Jim was living with me and my family, like, he was going to the UW, so we'd hang out at the UW and jam or whatever. And there was a record store called Cellophane Square, and Jim picked up Fulton Street Mall and brought it home.
Really?
And we were just listening to it. I'm like, wow, I mean, what is this? You know, like just being interested in new music and obviously new music from New York, new jazz. And Tim, I'm sure he talked about, you know, his 3-record deal with Columbia. You know, that's why I got to hear him, because he was on a major label. So anyway, he became sort of, you know, him and John Zorn, like, for us, you know, at that age, we're like, what are these guys doing? You know, so that's where I first became aware of Tim's music, was through that record. And subsequently, like, I think he might have heard me when I was playing with this band Orange Then Blue. And then he would play in Boston and we'd always go. And then Tim is so, you know, he's such a personal guy, and like would always want to hang. So I just remember hanging with him after some shows he did in Boston, like him and Hank Roberts. I think they played duo. I think that's the show where we actually hung out with him. And so we got to know him. So I think he knew of us. And then when Jim moved to New York, he just ended up doing some sessions with Tim. And then when I moved to New York, I just did a session with Jim in the basement, and it clicked somehow. I have to say, like, my skill set at the time, like I could read music pretty well, just being classically trained, and then I loved to improvise, and those were two things that come in handy when learning Tim's music, because it's very dense, you know, music that he writes out, but then he expects, you know, full on improv, you know, not so much thematic development, but like just more sort of going for it, which is, so it's two things that I felt really comfortable and loved doing. So in that sense, like we clicked. I love working with alto players, having worked with Andrew for so long, and Oscar Noriega and Matt Dario as well. Like I saw that even felt familiar to, so anyway, maybe a few things were in my favor, where like it felt good connecting with Tim, and then he just decided to add me to this trio he had with Jim and Formanak, and called it Blood Count, and then there you go. So Human Feel was definitely like kind of a great, you know, stepping stone for also working with Blood Count, because like a lot of the things I was working on with Human Feel, like I got to bring to Blood Count as well. And then Blood Count, we actually got to tour, you know, got to make records, and it was all under Tim Berne and his name. And I will always have mad respect for Tim, because like from the point one, it was all like, you know, he's like obviously the band leader and older and just, you know, holding court, like it's his world and his band and all that. But like when we're on the bandstand, like we were four equals, and I never felt any condescension or any sort of like, hey man, support me, you know, that you can get sometimes in a more traditional jazz setting. So I've heard, you know, like where you have a leader, you know, and so it felt very collective when we were playing together. And I think that music holds up really well for me. Maybe not the JMT recordings. I don't think those sonically.
The screw gun are amazing.
The screw guns are amazing.
Saturation point, I mean, that's like.
Saturation point, I think, is really
discretion
good. And
also.
And just he was so smart, just like putting up a DAT machine and just recording the band live. It's so raw and good. And he's actually he's amazing about finding stuff on the net. He found some shows we did in the later 90s that sounds really like, oh my gosh. Well, especially now, like I feel so rusty, like listening to it. It's like, who's that playing? Like, I wish I could do that. But
you burn it there. You're like,
I mean, the band sounds really good, and we kind of go for it in a way that I don't get to do as often, you know, like I mean, you know, that band had its sort of run, and then, you know, Tim, I always respected this about Tim too. He was sort of like, okay, instead of having 10 bands that you're trying to sort of parlay to different festivals, like he was always about his one band, and we're just going to focus on this. And so then I guess he stopped and worked on to whatever projects he wanted to do. Totally cool. And Blood Count, super obviously influential for me.
Was it with Blood Count?
With those guys.
Was it with Blood Count that you first went to Europe, like as an extensive tour, or? For
our purposes here, yes, it was the first touring with real music in Europe for sure. And it's so funny, Tim. Tim, we always joke about this because I was experimenting with certain dietary restrictions and not eating meat or dairy when I first went on the road with him. And we're in Italy, and I was just like, I think the second day I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to eat cheese and drink cappuccinos forever. Yeah. So it's funny. Like, oh man, I think I feel bad because I think those first few tours, I think just finding vegetarian food was not as easy in the early 90s, and driving him and Formanak nuts, you know, it's just like, I feel sorry, you know. But actually, Tim and I have been having fun with this new project with Dave and Reed Anderson. You know, it's all it's all Ornette's music. Tim and I were looking for something let's do something together, and we just decided let's do Ornette's music. And then Tim, obviously, like wants everything has to have some Julius Hemphill songs in it too, because that's his cat. And so it's just, it's sort of a repertoire band of, Ornette and Julius and some of that, maybe lesser known Ornette music from the 70s. And it's been so much fun playing again, like sort of, it's that thing of like, well, we're not going to do it better than those guys, but who cares? We're just kind of sort of, it's not like we're trying to reinvent that music either. We're just kind of just play the songs and
speaking of, like I think Separation Point and Discretion are like 97 or 96. That's when they came out. And this is also where you released Yano, right? Like your first one
might be, I think, later 90s.
Yeah.
Like 90. Oh, you're right. Maybe.
I think it's 97.
Yeah, you might be right. So 96, we probably so it's about the same. Right.
And I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you, like, what was that moment that led you to becoming a band leader? And I mean, okay, Human Feel was kind of a co-led group, but like you under your own name, let's say, Chris Speed band. When was that moment you decided, okay, I think I'm ripe, or I want to do that now, or
am I ready? Yeah, I think it was more like, I don't think it was calculated in the sense, it's not like I had a Blue Note deal or something, I think it was more sort of like, okay, I guess time to step up. That's all it was probably like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to do this now, sort of like, oh, I guess I'm going to make a record. I guess I got to learn how to write music, that kind of sort of like, it just felt like something I needed to do. And sort of like, what do my heroes do? Like, well, this is what you do,
Makes sense.
It's really, being a leader makes you a better side person too, as we all can attest, it's just like, it's just being a well-rounded person, like, okay, I need to step up and sort of get in there. And I had some ideas that, that whole joke of like, where you try to like interject ideas in somebody else's situation. And then they're like, get your own band, motherfucker. Like sort of a bit of that of like, okay, I guess I have some ideas instead of like, sort of, whatever, like trying to like get Tim Berne to like play some Balkan song. Like, I guess I'll do my own version of that in my own band. So like Pechora, I guess Pechora was before Yano, and Pechora was also a collective.
Was before,
was a collective, but maybe I instigated it. Maybe, maybe I was sort of the one kind of getting that momentum going. But it definitely was a collective where, I mean, all these bands feel the same, I guess, you know what I'm saying? Like, could be a sort of a collective too. In the way
it's
that we
like
approach the
you
music,
can go anywhere. Yeah.
It just has my name on it. Maybe that's okay. It's going to be Chris Speed's record, so, I think that's all it is. It's just like, okay, time to do this. And even like starting a label, it's like, well,
I wanted to ask you about Skirl.
John Zorn started a label. Tim Berne started a label, and I was involved with all this music and projects that didn't have a home. So I was just like, I guess I'll start a label. It's more sort of community oriented than like my own work related. But anyway, I just back to like the forming was sort of like I wanted to do a band with Cuong, who had just moved to New York, who was a few years younger than me, who I'd known since he was in high school, and wanted to form a band with him. And then, well, Skuli and Jim sort of kind of went, it was a no-brainer to go that direction. And in its sort of relationship to the other projects I did, it kind of sat between like Pechora and Human Feel, just kind of like sort of my attempts at like kind of songwriting in a way without, the words, but sort of approaching composition in a more sort of personal way. And so that was
what was it like being for you as a band leader, like even then or now?
Stressful, pain in the butt, like it's there's not it's not much. There's not like a prize you get.
I know,
like no good deed goes unpunished is more the sort of refrain when I think of band leading. It's like, yeah, then you get to be the, you get to listen to, well, anyway, I'm trying to make it sound more sort of like an issue than it is.
No, but
yeah, band leading is tricky. It's more about
it
like
is, yeah.
and in my situations, it's like, oh, I guess I'm just the one like organizing the travel and
Yeah.
the hotel rooms that everybody's unhappy with, and having to like, try to get some gigs and
talk to journalists and many other people
all
and all that. Yeah.
So I'm not something that none of those things are my strong suit, but you learn, and it's like, okay, you want to be a creative DIY musician, then you better learn how to book a gig.
You better do that. Yeah.
And not get your feelings hurt when somebody doesn't want to book you or doesn't know who you are or care or whatever. It's just like, you got to learn, to toughen up a bit. And
but
so for those aspects, being a band leader, it's a lot to learn and
What we're talking about late 90s now, and when I look at the stuff you did in that period, it's just incredible. Tim Berne, Dave Douglas, Myra Melford, your own stuff, Pachora, probably I'm missing out on Claudia. I think Claudia was a little bit later, but
John had started Claudia as well around that time.
So how was that like for you, like playing wise and being busy wise those days? If you look at the schedule from, I don't know, November 98, it was really crazy or?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed normal to me, like, oh, I'm busy. Yeah, now I look back and I'm like, yeah, that was a lot. I mean, there was a period where, especially when and Pachora and then Jim's band were all releasing music at the same
Jim's
time.
Band, of course. Yeah.
And then all the, work with Tim or Myra or John. I mean, so many people, it was almost like kind of a Renaissance period in New York, with the Knitting Factory, and then shifting over to Tonic, sort of being these epicenters of kind of some sort of new music based in jazz and art rock and nice, you also had like a lot of influence from electronic music, like drum and bass and then improv. I mean, I felt like a lot of things happening that I couldn't even keep up with my own schedule, like of just trying to, stay creative and working on music, and then also going to hear music and hanging out and then doing shows and then tour, whatever. Yeah, it felt very fertile. Yeah, for sure. Like it was a nice time to be in New York. It wasn't super crazy, this pre 9/11, it's like before it became a sort of a police state for a bit, and then before rents in Brooklyn got really out of control, and the places in Manhattan, you could still have music. And I mean, I was doing shows in bars that, that wasn't the Knitting Factory or Tonic, but just even little places that were doing music. And I look back and like, right, it doesn't even exist anymore. Yeah. When you walk through the East Village, it's a different beast now. And so I'm fortunate I got to, I mean, I'm at the age now where I can look back and like, go, oh, that was so fun, oh, well. But I guess I haven't thought too much about how much I benefited from all that. But like, the whole idea is like, we venerate these bands, the music, because, they were playing together all the time, like Coltrane's band or whatever it is. Like they were gigging every night and sort of, maybe I wasn't getting that with one specific band, but I was definitely working a lot and playing creative music and able to sort of pay my rent somehow, so that's kind of my only thoughts. I don't have any other, it's not like there was any sort of secret magic going on other than just people doing fun things and having sort of some nice, cross, fading of different, styles. And I wasn't really involved in the sort of more straight ahead scene at all. I wasn't like Kurt, sort of was involved a lot at places like Fat Cat and Smalls. And I wasn't really part of that scene. I was just more at the Knitting Factory and Tonic and sort of more interested in the more sort of experimental. But the funny thing is like, I, of course, love jazz and I don't know. It's just a period in time.
No. But we mentioned John already in the beginning, Hollenbeck and Claudia. You know, I love this band, like compositionally and everything. And I wanted to ask you, how did you guys? When does your story with John begin? Actually, you know, because you seem to be fitted so beautifully in that band. You know, with the clarinet and I mean the unit, the instrumentation is unique. I'll put it like that. And how did you?
John knew what he wanted. You know, like
Yeah.
John was very specifically like, I think clarinet, accordion vibes with that combination. He crafted that in his brain, and I'm glad he asked me to do it. I have so much respect for John. I mean, what a prolific writer, what a great thinker, and what a sweet, like soulful, warm-hearted person, and like great work ethic. It's actually a little maddening, his work ethic. It's kind of like, but I'm glad he does, because he has a lot on his plate, whether it's like commissions and like big band music, and like he's in that world. And I know you need time, as we all know with composition, like you just need time. And I'm like trying to come up with a melody, and that's hard enough. But like, the orchestration that he gets into, and it's funny, I've been, I got an insight into his, I mean, I've known his reverence for Brookmeyer forever, because he always talks about Bob, but and being a big influence. But like, I've been teaching, I'll say it's a little tangent here. I've been teaching a bit at Cal Arts, and I've had a couple, ensembles, and yet during this time, it's kind of, you can't meet with an ensemble, and I'm not great at sort of like generating, hey, let's improvise over Zoom. So it's like mostly my ensembles now are like just music appreciation. So I just bring in music of my friends, people I've worked with, or my favorite music, and as many scores as I can sort of acquire. And I'm sort of like running out of steam. I'm hoping next fall, like we can actually meet, but so I'm actually calling up friends and being like, what's your favorite? So I just, the other day, I asked John for his favorite Brookmeyer piece, and he sent it to me, and it's this KP 94, which is over King Porter Stomp, that Brookmeyer. It's a famous big band piece that I didn't know, and I was playing it for the ensemble and listening as myself, and I'm like, oh my God, this sounds like John Hollenbeck's. I just, it sort of clicked, like I was able to sort of find his like secret mojo, magic powder, is his love for Brookmeyer, and sort of like taking what Bob did and sort of bringing that to his small group and then to his large group writing. And again, another band where I feel like feels kind of, well, actually it's John's vision, John's world, but like when we're actually playing, like I feel fully committed, and even if it's like less improvising, and like, it doesn't matter. Like I still, I love the vision.
Sounds beautiful.
I love sort of the effect and this kind of like working chamber music, but it also, it can have sort of a heaviness, of rock music, or can have the intensity of free jazz music. Like he's really found like his voice, and with Claudia, like, he hasn't gotten any love from the classical world or the jazz world, but he's persevered and crafted his own sort of world in spite of sort of lack of, support. Like a lot of these scenes, like if you're the other, then, it's kind of you make it harder for yourself.
True.
As I feel like I have some experience with, of just like, what do you mean I can't play jazz festival? I love jazz, like whatever it is. Like, I feel like John has really crafted his world, and he's persevered and he's a great drummer too. So
sure.
It's nice to be, that he's kept it together for so long as well. And it's nice to have, it's just, I feel fortunate, like, wow, because I love chamber music, and just growing up playing so much chamber music, on clarinet, and just like, another way I feel, comfortable. Or like also working, I've gotten to work with Uri Kane a lot, and just like doing his sort of like, desecrations of great classical music like that also feels very familiar.
The Mahler and all that projects.
All those crazy,
that's amazing.
Breakdowns of Mozart and whatever, but
Chris, just one last question, not to take too much of your time. Just like, when I listen to all the records you're on, your sound, on the tenor, it's so recognizable. You know, I don't know, just I don't know, maybe it's because you, like you mentioned, it's you, it's the music you play, you got involved in this world and of the music, but like, how did you develop your sound through the years, or how did you work on that, or still do? I mean, you know, because I heard you with Dan, or then I heard you with, I don't know, with Pachora or whatever, but it's like, especially, or, you know, Alas No Access, or how did you work on your sound, or still do, like becoming aware of this?
It's a work in progress, of course. No, it's, you know, it's like, I think one sort of revelation I had when I moved to New York was just like, you know, the people I were working with were, you know, like there was I was sort of like, you know, there's so many saxophonists who play, you know, circles around me, you know, like what's the point here? And I realized just like the people I were working with were less concerned about being able to shred over, you know, pick your standard, you know, but like having an original sound. So I actually did, what does that mean? Like I worked on that, like with myself, like what is, you know, what does that mean? Like I spent some thought and work just like trying to figure out what it is I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. And not that it was that sort of clean cut, because, you know, our artistic process is, you know, long and over time, and, you know, I mean, you know, we go through periods working on certain things and then like ending that and going other directions. And like, for me, sound has always been sort of a thing. Like if you know, if I don't want to hear my sound, like why would I expect anybody else to? And sort of finding the connections with sound and ideas, you know, they're not separate, you know, and like, and I've sort of, through sort of also relationships, you know, with other musicians and other saxophonists, like Oscar Gudjonsen is a dear friend of mine, like sort of, you know, he's been a big influence for me in the last like 10 years of just sort of trying to find the right equipment and sort of finding it like it's okay to go extreme, you know, like, okay, if I'm going to go for a dark, warm sound, why not just try to go as far as you can go, you know? So like I play a con and this big weird wood mouthpiece, and, you know, it's just like, so it's not like it's not easy, but it's like I've sort of made decisions, you know, to sort of put me in this world. But then a lot of it is just like kind of who we are and what we work on, you know. It's not like I'm thinking about it all the time, but like I definitely have put some sort of effort into, like, you know, it's like a taste thing too. Like, you know, like, okay, I could do that, but why don't I do this? Or like, you know, I don't know. I was listening when I was picking tracks for like for the trio record Respect. Like I was just the first track, I kind of went for it of just like, I'm just gonna like veg out on this ballad and just like focus on tone and spit and air and just like patient, you know. So it's like that's kind of like an extreme. My idea of sort of being extreme in a context, and I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's just like for me, those values are like those values of like, you know, of having a recognizable sound, like were instilled to me early on just by listening to like, well, like Dolphy, as you mentioned, and like Train and Sonny, like, you know, these guys from a few notes. And so like, I'm like, like the people I'm playing with, they want me to sound unique and to have some personal ideas. So I think from early on, I did a lot of work with that. And I bring this up even with students of just like, you know, I spent time recording myself and listening back and being like, no, that sounds kind of cool and unique. What am I doing? You know, and even like the early Yano sessions, like before it was Yano, when I was just jamming with those guys, I recorded us improvising freely just to sort of like, what are we doing? Why do I like this? And why does this not work? And just to sort of try to approach it a little more, you know, with a little more sort of purpose rather than just like being the like, I don't know, let's just
Yeah.
play, you know, like, but which is kind of where it always ends up anyway. You know, that's where the best music I think gets made, is where you have some sort of like foundation, but that you can then be like, okay, let's just play, you know. But I don't know. Sam, those are great questions, and like maybe after a few drinks I might go in a different direction.
No,
with it,
come
but,
on, it's good.
Hopefully, you know, it's like,
it's just cool, you know, because when I listen to you, let's say to your generation of guys, you know, talking about tenor, you know, it's amazing that there are so many recognizable voices. Like, you know, it's you, and then it's like, I don't know, Mark Turner, and completely different worlds. But each of you play like 4 notes, and it's like, oh yeah, that's, you know, it's Chris, it's Mark, it's, I don't know, Chris Potter or whoever. And I find that amazing that still, even nowadays, the younger generation, it's possible to do that, finding a voice within this huge sea of so many players. You know, I love that. So,
I mean, I guess, you know, every generation is, I mean, we're all moving forward, you know. It's like, I don't even want to like go there with those sort of, you know, with the like worshiping of our heroes, but it's like, well, there's a certain point you got to like sort of throw down and do your own thing.
Definitely. Yeah. Cool, Chris. Thanks so much.
What a pleasure. Samo, thank you. No, man, thanks. This was so much fun. And I can't wait to like run into you again, and good luck with your music. And
you too.
Send me your latest, you know, a link to whatever your latest project is. And
Definitely.
I'll send you over I'll send you my clarinet, you know.
Yeah, man, you have to do that. Yeah, come on. I love to hear it.
Dr. Jazz.